So I guess I'm doing one of these now. Many people have responded to PragerU videos in the past, and I'm going to be doing mostly the same thing in this video. I don't think anyone's talked about this video yet, so why not be the first? I haven't actually checked if anyone has responded to it yet. I will not be linking the original video because I don't want to give PragerU any more views, but I will put the title and the thumbnail here if you really want to look it up. For the fortunately unaware, PragerU is a YouTube channel run by Dennis Prager that is made up of about 5-minute videos talking about right-wing propaganda. Seriously, the shit that comes out of this channel is comical. They have a video on Robert E. Lee that has since been taken down that was pro-slavery. I will link a re-uploaded version in the description. I will show a quick clip from the video just to make my point.
After 30 years of military service, Lee led U.S. Marines to crush the attempted slave rebellion by radical abolitionist John Brown in October 1859.
Yes, this is what we're dealing with. So now we have these people talking about trans youth. This should be great.
If you know any middle or high school girls today, or if you are one yourself, it would not be surprising if you know someone who identifies as transgender.
So let's first discuss our host because this will be important. Abigail Shrier is the author of the book Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, as you can see by the title at the bottom. I have not read the book, so I will not comment on its quality, but with a title like that, it's probably pretty spicy. I bet Sean or ContraPoints will do a video on the book at some point anyways.
The latest statistics indicate that 2% of American high school students now identify as transgender, and the overwhelming majority of them are teenage girls. Between 2016 and 2017 alone, the number of females seeking gender surgery in America quadrupled.
Also, just a quick thing, at no point in this video will they refer to trans men as men. They will misgender them for the whole video. I'm sorry about this.
But if you graduated high school over a decade ago, it was unlikely that you knew anyone who was transgender because, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the condition underlying it afflicted roughly 1 in 10,000 people, or 0.01% of the population.
Now, this is the first time they will conflate gender dysphoria and transgenderism. They see these two things as one and the same. I am non-binary, but I'm not on Twitter at all, so I don't really know the community standing on this, but I do not see gender dysphoria and being trans as the same thing. I view it as gender dysphoria can lead to being trans, but it's not the only reason. Because being trans is not just about being dysphoric about your gender. It's also about things like how you express yourself.
Almost none of these cases were teenage girls. In fact, before 2012, there was no scientific or medical literature discussing adolescent girls who wanted to transition to the opposite sex.
This will be a pattern of them referring to gender as sex. Just to explain, sex is referring to someone's genitals or chromosomes. Gender is referring to their identity.
That doesn't mean that we didn't know about transgender individuals. Gender dysphoria, the severe discomfort in one's biological sex,
There it is again.
has been studied for nearly 100 years. It almost always involved boys who began feeling it between the ages of 2 and 4 and were strong and persistent in their assertions to everyone around them that they were really girls. When a phenomenon that affects one half of a population, boys, suddenly begins affecting the other half, girls, and when its age of onset shifts from preschool to adolescence, something significant is happening.
So here they are talking about how in older studies they found that being trans was mainly a thing that children assigned male at birth were, but now more people assigned female at birth are showing signs of it in later stages of development. Is there not a chance that this is because we just haven't been talking a lot about trans men? They're not really in the media that much because they don't call into question men's masculinity as much, so they don't get so huffy about their insecurities. I think this could lead to mostly having studies done on trans women and not trans men. Therefore, it can seem like trans men just came out of nowhere, but really they were always here, just not covered in the media.
In 2016, Brown University public health researcher Lisa Littman began studying the sudden spike in trans identification of teenage girls. She concluded that peer influence and social media influence had a lot to do with this trans teen phenomenon. After all, based on parent reports, none of these girls had exhibited symptoms of gender dysphoria at the age that it typically first presents, early childhood.
Yay! We get to talk about sources. I actually read this study and boy does it have some problems. So Lisa Littman performed a study to determine, well, let her say it in her own words. The purpose of this study. In online forums, parents have reported that their children seem to experience a sudden or rapid onset of gender dysphoria, appearing for the first time during puberty or even after its completion. Parents describe that the onset of gender dysphoria seemed to occur in the context of belonging to a peer group where one, multiple, or even all of the friends have become gender dysphoric and transgender identified during the same time frame. Parents also reported that their children exhibited an increase in social media/internet use prior to disclosure of transgender identity. Recently, clinicians have reported that post-puberty presentations of gender dysphoria in natal females that appear to be rapid in onset is a phenomenon that they are seeing more and more in their clinic. Academics have raised questions about the role of social media in the development of gender dysphoria. The purpose of the study was to collect data about parents' observations, experiences, and perspectives about their adolescent and young adult (AYA) children showing signs of an apparent sudden or rapid onset of gender dysphoria that began during or after puberty, and develop a hypothesis about factors that may contribute to the onset and/or expression of gender dysphoria among this demographic group. So teens are experiencing rapid onset gender dysphoria. Is this due to social media use? Okay, let's find out. Methods. For this descriptive exploratory study, recruitment information with a link of a 90-question survey consisting of multiple choice, like or type, and open-ended questions was placed on 3 websites where parents had reported sudden or rapid onsets of gender dysphoria occurring in their teen or young adult children. The study's eligibility criteria included parental response that their child had a sudden or rapid onset of gender dysphoria and parental indication that their child's gender dysphoria began during or after puberty. To maximize the chances of finding cases meeting eligibility criteria, the 3 websites, Fourth Wave Now, Transgender Trend, and Youth Trans Critical Professionals, were selected for targeted recruitment. Website moderators and potential participants were encouraged to share the recruitment information and link to the survey with any individuals or communities that they thought might include as eligible participants to expand the reach of the project through snowball sampling techniques. So they used 3 websites to spread the survey. How about we check out these websites? First, Fourth Wave Now. I will now read the About page. Fourth Wave Now was founded in 2015 by Denise, the mother of a teenage girl who suddenly announced she was a trans man after a few weeks of total immersion in YouTube transition vlogs and other trans-orientated social media. Denise's daughter Kyra, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it, I really have no idea, has since desisted from identifying as transgender, and in 2019 co-founded an organization for desisted/detransitioned women, the Pike Resilience Project. Also have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce that. In early 2015, after much results and fruitless searching for an alternative online viewpoint, Denise began writing about her deepening criticism of the ever-accelerating medical and media's fascination with the phenomenon of transgender children. Fourth Wave Now has expanded to feature not only Denise's writing, but that of other parents, formerly trans-identified people, and others with professional expertise and experience with young people questioning their gender identity. So whether or not you agree with this or not, you can see that there is a bias here. This website will primarily be made up of people skeptical of teenagers transitioning or even being trans at all, but I think the other websites will have some other viewpoints so we can have a bit more representation of the broader world of opinions on the subject. So let's see the next website, Transgender Trend. Established in 2015, Transgender Trend had led the way in advocating for the rights of children who reject gender stereotypes and be who they really are without discrimination, labeling, or medical intervention to fix them. We believe all children have the right to go through puberty and reach adulthood with their fertility intact, and that is a fundamental human right. We believe that children with gender dysphoria deserve evidence-based treatment and have a right to the same duty of care as any other child. Our message is, no child is born in the wrong body. Transgender Trend advocates for the most vulnerable children who are caught up in the recent trend in society to replace the objective reality of sex with the subjective idea of gender identity as the criteria for being a man or being a woman. Gender identity ideologies teaches children who don't conform to the masculine or feminine stereotypes that their personalities are wrong for their sex and their bodies are then wrong for their gender identity. So basically the same thing as the other one. Again, whether or not you agree or disagree with this, which I do disagree with this ideology, this idea has a bias, then leading to a biased sample pool. So there's one more website left. Youth Trans Critical Professionals. Well, damn. But I did find an interview with the founder of Youth Trans Critical Professionals on another website. Fourth Wave Now. It's the gender critical cinematic universe. But here's a quote from the interview. We don't have a moral issue with people identifying as transgender and believe that those who do should be protected from discrimination like any other minority. However, the medical treatments for the children who identify as transgender are risky, not approved by the FDA, and permanent. With any other condition, we would be bending over backwards to find other ways to support these children without resorting to major medical intervention, and would turn to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery in only the rarest and most extreme cases. It is very disturbing to the originators of the usetranscriticalprofessionals.org that these treatments, whose long-term effects are not well studied, are being offered casually for a condition which isn't even clearly defined. So the same thing as last time, really. There is a bias. So all three websites they used to spread this survey were websites with the express purpose of being critical and skeptical of trans teenagers, which seems like a very biased sample pool. So let's look at the results. There were 256 completed surveys that met our criteria. Take note that these were filled out by the parents. 82.8% of the children referred to in the survey were people assigned female at birth with an average age of 16.4 years old when the survey was completed, and an average age of 15.2 at time of coming out as trans. They also bring up the 41% had a non-heterosexual orientation before coming out, and that 62.5% had been diagnosed with at least one mental disorder or having neurodevelopmental disability prior to coming out. I don't know why that's important, but it's there. In 36.8% of the children's friend groups, the majority of the friends identified as trans. 47.2% of the parents reported a decline in mental health of their child, and 47.3% report a decline in their relationship with their child since the AYA came out being in quotes. That's fun. An obvious conclusion that can be drawn from all this is that the three websites used to spread the survey were primarily frequented by mothers who are gender critical or gender skeptical and don't trust or like that their daughter is coming out as trans. This can lead to a decline in mental health because the parents are not thinking their feelings are valid, and a decline in relationship with their parents for the same reason. And this can lead to cases where they want to spend more time with trans people. And maybe their depression coming from strong emotions, and those emotions not being taken well, so it can lead to them going on social media more and isolating themselves more. This all makes sense. So what was Lisa Lippman's conclusion? The descriptive exploratory study for parents' reports provides valuable detailed information that allows for the generation of hypotheses about factors that may contribute to the onset and/or expression of gender dysphoria among AYAs. Emerging hypotheses include the possibility of a potential new subcategory of gender dysphoria, referred to rapid onset gender dysphoria, that has not yet been clinically validated, and the possibility of social influences and maladaptive coping mechanisms. Parent-child conflict may also explain some of the findings. More research that includes data collection from AYAs, parents, clinicians, and third-party informants is needed to further explore the roles of social influence, maladaptive coping mechanisms, parental approaches, and family dynamics in the development and duration of gender dysphoria in adolescents and young adults. I feel the problem with throwing around the rapid onset gender dysphoria is from what I said to keep in mind before. These are all parent-completed surveys, and at no point in the study does it even imply that children had any input in the findings, meaning that the rapid onset nature is what the parents observed, not necessarily what the child experienced. So the sample pool is extremely biased, and there is no input from actual trans youth we are talking about. So that's great. Let's move on with the video, shall we? We're only 2 minutes in.
YouTube, Reddit, Tumblr, TikTok, and Instagram all host popular social media influencers, today's version of Hollywood stars, who insist that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, you're probably trans. Many promise that if you start a course of testosterone, all of your problems will go away.
Well, that's a bold claim. How do they substantiate that? Well, they don't. Scrolling through the sources page, they have no source showing any social media influencers advocating for people to come out as trans in any way, let alone just because they are uncomfortable with their bodies. I watch a lot of trans YouTubers, and none of them have ever said anything like, you should be trans, because their message is always be comfortable with who you are, whoever that is. So telling people to be trans goes completely against that message. Not that it matters to PragerU, just say whatever you want, you don't have to back it up.
There's every reason to believe that these girls are experiencing real psychological pain. Rates of anxiety, depression, and instances of self-harm are all at record levels for this generation. A quick fix becomes very tempting.
Okay, I was just going to make the point that she's right that anxiety and depression rates are going up, but it's not due to people coming out as trans. But then I decided for fun I would read her source, and it reads like everyone's depressed because we're teaching our kids to be snowflakes. The person they used as an expert, Jonathan Haidt, I have no idea how to pronounce that either, says that there are 3 untruths that are making our children more depressed, more anxious, and more likely to have thoughts of suicide or self-harm. The first untruth is, you are fragile. It was as though students were led to believe that if they encountered something that was offensive to them, they would be made weaker by it. This belief is the opposite of the timeless truth that strength comes from managing life's challenges, captured in Nietzsche's maxim, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I went to a fairly left-leaning high school, and at no point were we told or implied that we would be made weaker by encountering offensive things. There are very strict policies against offensive things, but I don't see how that is a problem. But this just seems to be either a misrepresentation or just a misunderstanding of today's culture, because the whole point of something like the Pride movements and BLM or Antifa is we will overcome. No matter what kinds of hate or hurt comes our way, we will persist and we will succeed. That seems like the complete opposite of what Haidt believes is happening. So what is the next untruth? If you feel it, it must be true. Students seem to have learned that they should always trust their feelings, said Haidt. This belief flies in the face of wise counsel that teaches that our feelings are unreliable sources of information. Learning to question our automatic emotional reactions is an invaluable skill in navigating life and our relationships in particular. Basically, thinking your feelings are valid is a bad thing. I think he's saying that validating people's feelings is like if someone said that they feel worthless and then you told them they were right, you are worthless. But saying someone's feelings are valid is more than that. If someone is depressed that their dog just died, but they think they shouldn't be because it's just an animal and that they should be stronger than that, you should tell them no, it's okay to be sad. A thing died. That's sad. And to be sad about it is not weak. It's strong to be honest about your emotions and to be able to communicate with other people about them. You shouldn't just ignore your emotions. You should work with them and see what you can do to manage them and talk about them. And the last untruth is, life is about us versus them. Haidt also said that many students seem to believe they should see life as a battle between good people, those who agree with them, and evil people, those who hold opposing beliefs. And that is exactly the opposite of what the ancients East and West have taught us. For example, Haidt and Leikhoff, no idea either, quote from an Alexander, not even going to try, Gulag Archipelago. The line separating good and evil passes right through every human heart. There are definitely some holier-than-thou kids out there who think they're right and everyone else is wrong and the whole world is out to get them. But to paint the whole generation this way and to say that that's why there's high rates of depression and anxiety is not a good argument in my opinion. It seems like one of the goals of this generation is to hear more people's ideas and to get more people involved in the conversation to get a broader perspective on the state of the world and what we need to do to better ourselves in society. I don't think the whole generation is taught as it or believes that there is a clear good and bad and that the goal is to have the right beliefs. The goal is to understand beliefs. But back to the video before we get too off track.
So it doesn't take much, a YouTube video, a friend's suggestion, to get a troubled girl to buy into the fantasy that gender transition is the answer.
Well, we don't have free mental health care and we still have stigma around mental health and people's feelings. Like thinking people coming out as trans is just a way to get away from their depression instead of them finally being open about themselves. So there are a few things we could do to try and help teenagers. I don't think telling them that they aren't actually trans is a good solution.
Unfortunately for these girls who do not have typical gender dysphoria, gender transition rarely offers relief.
I went to go check their sources on this since again it's a very bold claim, and the link on this source page is just to an Amazon page of this book called Irreversible Damage, Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Wait a minute, that's the book the host wrote. Yes, a source they used was not only the book the hosts themselves wrote, it's not even the book, it's an Amazon link. The source page does not have any page numbers or quotes, and the Amazon page doesn't have any sources that the book uses. So PragerU cannot substantiate this claim because they obviously didn't go through a high school English class where they learn how to make a proper works cited page.
And it's a catastrophic mistake for psychologists, educators, and the medical establishment to rush these teens towards a solution that will almost certainly harm rather than heal.
Also, why do so many of these gender-critical and anti-trans people think that professionals are just throwing people into treatment and surgery? Especially in the US right now, you have to have long talks with therapists and doctors to prove you're trans. So we have more things putting children's feelings into question and then wonders of why they get depressed. And surgeries, like any other surgeries, would be long talks between doctors, parents, and the child. and it would only be done if deemed necessary. They're not just sealing vaginas and chopping off penises left and right. It's hard to get any kind of even reversible treatment, let alone surgeries, and also the cost. It could be over $100,000 for surgeries. So where is this narrative coming from that all these professionals are just rushing children to the surgery room as fast as possible without any discussion?
Because here's what's not in dispute. Unnecessary medical gender transition causes irreversible damage, high risk of infertility, sexual dysfunction, and the creation of a permanent medical patient.
This is true to an extent. All these things can happen, but they are not guaranteed, and these are all risks that do not fly over the heads of people transitioning. They know the risks and the benefits. They know that this might not end well. They are fully aware of all of this. And if they are a minor, they probably aren't getting any surgeries. But if they are, it's probably pretty important, and they would have had talked extensively about it with their parents and doctors and come to a decision that they are okay with taking the risks. And infertility seems not very important to a trans man, although I'm not a trans man, so I can't speak to that.
Tragically, we've made it far too easy for kids to take this path, long before they're ready psychologically or emotionally to make such a life-altering decision. Testosterone is easily obtained by today's teens. In Oregon, a 15-year-old can walk into a gender clinic. Yes, there are now gender clinics all over the country, and walk out the same day with a prescription for testosterone without her parents' permission.
And just like any other prescription, there are steps you need to take and criteria you need to meet. For my brief research, it mostly talks about, again, the risks associated, which any competent doctor would talk to you about, and then they would see if this is what you really want. And looking through their sources for this, it's just a document talking about some legal stuff for patients in Oregon. I couldn't find anything about trans people or getting hormones. And it's right after the source for later breeding, irreversible damage, and the same Amazon link.
16-year-old girls have been able to undergo double mastectomies, the removal of both breasts, without even a therapist's note.
Their source here is a document talking about how minors transitioning is bad, but has absolutely nothing to do about this treatment, let alone 16-year-olds being able to get it without any extra steps.
Predictably, hasty gender transition, remember we're talking about teenagers here, is now leading to a lot of regret. New testimonials appear on YouTube almost every week from teens who acknowledge that they made a terrible mistake and warn others not to make the same one.
The source for this is the Amazon link to her book again, but I did look up the amount of people who regretted transitioning. I found one article of a trans man who detransitioned and started identifying as a woman again. Wikipedia has this quote: a 2015 survey of transgender people in the United States found that 8% had to detransition at some point, with the majority of those later living as a gender other than the one assigned to them at birth, which doesn't actually specify to what extent they transitioned and to what extent they detransitioned or the reason why. Whether it was that they regretted having treatment, they identified as a different gender, life circumstances, prejudice, but the majority of them are still trans in some way.
So how do you protect your daughter from being drawn into this dangerous and growing trend? First, limit their exposure to social media as much as you can. Several academic studies have already linked the alarming rates of anxiety and depression to young girls' punishing experience on social media, a place that often makes them feel sad, unattractive, and alone.
Social media definitely causes high rates of anxiety and depression, although they don't have a source for this claim. But I don't see how this relates to being trans, unless you're saying that being on social media will make you trans, but I feel you have yet to prove that claim. Really, it seems like what you were trying to do here is isolate your child and make sure they don't have exposure to new things you don't want them to see, which seems to go against what the other article was saying about how you should face things that offend you. But I do not believe the way to protect your child from something is to make sure they don't learn about it ever. From the trans people I've heard talk about the subject, most of them have said that a regret of theirs is they didn't transition sooner. They feel like there was so much wasted time where they weren't able to be themselves and be honest about who they are to themselves or others. And this is what you want your child to have? A life where they are ignorant to the problems and their solution? They don't know why they feel these things because you won't let them find out and become who they want to be and be happy and comfortable with themselves?
Second, oppose the teaching of gender ideology in your kid's school. In California, gender identity education begins in kindergarten and proceeds through high school. The theme is that kids' gender identity is totally independent of their physical sex and something that only they can know. Schools can and should insist that every child be treated respectfully, without sowing gender confusion in an entire student population.
It's the same thing. Make sure your child doesn't know that being trans is a thing so they can't do it. Keep them completely oblivious to a whole community of people and isolate them from anyone who would tell them that forbidden information, which does necessitate that they do not under any circumstances talk to trans kids in their school or in any other groups they're in. Are you going to have to screen every child they talk to make sure they're cis? How are you going to do that? Inspect their genitals? I bet the parents will be very understanding of you wanting to see their kids' genitals. And this also comes down to how the school is simply saying that trans people exist and that's okay. It's propaganda, sowing gender confusion throughout the whole school. Or maybe it's letting people know that it's okay and they are valid instead of just shunning them from the rest of the world knowing their existence. Are trans people fucking Voldemort? There's some Lovecraftian horror that will bring terror down just by speaking of their existence. Can't we educate our children that a community exists and that it's okay that that is true without indoctrinating our children? How else do we tell them? Or do we just never tell them and hope they never find out until their 20s or 30s when they realize they were trans the whole time and that's why they've always felt so uncomfortable and unhappy with themselves? All the trans people I've talked to reported being much happier after they had transitioned. Like a weight has been lifted off of their shoulders and now they feel like they can be who they really are.
Third, and most importantly, remember that a teenager is still just a teenager. You don't have to agree with every identity proclamation your daughter comes up with. Knowledge of her identity will develop over time. Until then, being the adult in the relationship is the most loving thing you can do. I'm Abigail Schreier, author of Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, for Prager University.
So if all else fails and your child finds out about trans people and they come out as trans, just tell them that their feelings aren't valid and that you know what's best. Just deny that they're trans because they're a teenager. So when do you stop denying that they're trans? If it's because they're a teenager, we can't let them decide yet, then when can they? When they're 18? If when they're 18 they still identify as trans, then you'll say, cool, we'll get you on your treatment right away, right? That seems like what you're saying, that they'll have to slug through their teenage years uncomfortable with who they are and not being able to truly express themselves, all because you don't think their feelings are valid. If not a teenager, then what age? What age do they finally get to decide? What age do we tell them trans people exist and that that's okay? At what age do they have the right to know? This what about the children argument falls apart once you realize it's not about the children, it's about the parents. They don't want the child to be trans, so they make sure they don't even know what trans is. If you cared about the children, you would educate them and allow them to get treatment. But you only care about yourself and not about your child's feelings. So basically, PragerU fucking sucks. I mean, they're fun to watch for a laugh, but I always feel a bit guilty when I watch them because I really don't like giving them free views. And honestly, it's probably best if we don't. But I do think that making videos like this is honestly one of the best things to do, because now if you look at PragerU, it's mostly shitposting, which I also have on this channel, and people responding to it, which I think is good. It's good to have, a bunch of videos debunking them as the things you find instead of them themselves. So therefore, if people do start watching PragerU videos, hopefully they will just at least stumble upon videos debunking them. And I do definitely feel bad for the right wing, because the left wing, the videos we have to debunk are usually like 5-10 minutes at most. Left wing videos like philosophy tube or ContraPoints, they can get like, nearly 2 hours. I would not want to be responding to one of those. Whenever I watch a PragerU video with anyone, just complain about it for fun, we usually end up going for like at least 2 hours on a 5-minute video. So yeah, it's quite a lot. But I don't know, this is kind of fun to make, so thanks for watching. I'm out of things to say. Good night, everyone.